Washington Common Council work session for January 27th, 2024. Alderperson Sigwart is likely on his way. Otherwise, all alderpersons are present. Tonight is a work session of the council. So just a reminder for our guests and audience members, this is not an interaction during the work session. If you have public comments, those would be most appropriate when we go to the regular scheduled city council meeting at 6:30. And then again, at that time, you'd have up to 3 minutes to kind of speak, share your ideas, inquiries, or questions that you have. As you'll see tonight in the process that we're laying out, the council tonight is for the first time having a conversation about this potential project on the north side of Port Washington. We appreciate your engagement tonight. I'd ask if you're just here for this part to stay through the second council meeting at 6:30. We've got some pretty cool stuff going on at our council meeting. We've got a new fire chief being sworn in, new lieutenant of our police department. Show them their support too. That'd be pretty great for us as well. So council tonight, the objectives, I'm gonna put them up here on the screen, then I'm gonna turn it over to Aaron from Cloverleaf, and we've got two speakers tonight, Chris Smith from Von Briesen and Roper, an attorney who's gonna be helping guide us through this. Council, this evening, as we go through the conversations, I just ask that you allow the speakers to complete their presentations and then any questions you have, and then we'll kind of go through this. So up on the screen, these are our objectives for our hour together tonight. It's really about us being able to have a public conversation about the future on the north side of the city of Port Washington, review the journey of kind of how we got here, and then build our own knowledge of what is possible, while also understanding really the scope of the project and the potential impact on the city of Port Washington. Friends in the audience, we're at step one of maybe 1,000 if this were to actually come to fruition. So if you're thinking, or if even council, if we're under the belief that like we're gonna hear a dead timeline and who they are and all these different pieces, that knowledge has not been determined yet. So that's really what we're going to go to. And the walkaway objective from council is that we leave here with a list of needs for the city staff to develop for us so that we can accurately communicate. So what questions we'd have. So for instance, if you had a question about like what would the impact be of this development on fire and safety services, we would want to collect that and then have the city staff study that as we're making our decisions to truly understand the impact of all of our actions and what's going on. All right, so any questions on the objectives for the time or clarifications? Okay, then really want to just kind of give you a brief summary, and the Ozaki Press did a really great article that kind of walks through kind of how we got here and what we're doing. But really, we're here tonight because earlier this year, someone else approached the city of Port Washington with an idea for a significant development on the north side. It was nothing that we had been thinking about or dreamed about. The city of Port Washington has all land on the north side that's already zoned industrial, and over the course of years, people come in and out inquiring on that property of, hey, would you do warehousing there, or could we do condos and condo buildings for manufacturing, et cetera. But in the case that came last spring and then this summer, that was nothing that we were looking for or really even invited, but it was brought to us and we investigated that a little bit, but that is no longer the case. That was someone else's dream. As a result of that conversation, however, it started to spark of like, what could we do to align ourselves with our strategic plan as a city of looking for more mixed development for Port Washington. In a minute, you're gonna see how lopsided our development is in Port Washington and how that creates a very significant tax burden on residents. And this, I can't speak for the council, but I personally would like to see that balance shift so that there's a greater developmental mix for the city of Port Washington. So what happened at the end of the last potential opportunity was just a question that was asked of like, well, what else could happen? What else could we do there? And working with some regional economic development partners, M7 from Milwaukee and the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, we went forward and they started to explore other options and opportunities for the city of Port Washington. In those conversations, we kind of put conditions in place because we don't want invasive traffic. We don't want to have to redo our interstates. We don't want pollution. We don't want smokestacks and semis running all of the time. And the opportunity that you're going to see presented to us tonight is one of the options that was brought to us, which is the opportunity to have a data center, which is very technology-based warehousing on the north side of town that could potentially bring a significant opportunity for the city. Keywords are potentially. So tonight, what we want to do is explore those options. Excuse me. We want to explore those options because it's a significant thing for the city, the county, the state of Wisconsin, and then the United States. These server centers and developments are in high need. They are like building a new power company. They're not going to go away in 15 minutes, and the infrastructure that would be potentially created through this design would be significantly beneficial to the north side of Port Washington, everything from power to infrastructure, et cetera. So that's really what the conversation, what led us here tonight. So tonight, we're going to have a conversation. Aaron's going to be joining us here in a second from Cloverleaf Infrastructure to kind of talk about the scope and the ideas. But one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that we all saw and council saw was yesterday I made the request to see what is our assessed value for the city of Port Washington. And one of the pieces is that we have an incredibly imbalanced infrastructure when it comes to taxation in Port Washington. So when the city or the school district wants to come on board and they want to go to referendum, or we want to put in a safety center, you can see that 80% of that tax burden goes on people who live in houses. If we look to a neighboring community, a Saukville, a Grafton, where they have more mixed development, Grafton with significant commercial, Saukville with significant industrial and manufacturing, that burden is shared. And when I ran for mayor 5 years ago, it was one of the things that I had talked about very significantly was we have to be strategic about finding opportunities to spread out that tax burden so that the city of Port Washington, as residents, it's more attainable for us and sustainable for us as we grow. We can continue to grow on a very significant residential trajectory, but all that infrastructure, all of those costs all go to people who own homes. And we cannot be in a position where we are pricing ourselves out of our homes because we can't afford the taxes. So that was really kind of the impetus. That's what kind of got us here tonight. And, this has been an incredible learning journey that now you get to share in with us, and the council will this evening as we move forward. So any questions for me from council about anything I presented or clarifications?
Can I make one comment?
Yeah.
I had the wrong word base. I had bill in there, not base. Text base, significantly not big. So it's correct now.
Okay. No worries. Somebody will find some semantical issue with my structure up there anyways, but okay. But I appreciate you coming out tonight to hear this, the factual components, so that we can kind of move that. So with that, I just wanted to introduce some of our guests in the audience, and they don't have to stand, but with us tonight, Aaron from Cloverleaf, he'll be up here in a second, Chris Smith from Von Briesen, Rebecca Grease from M7, and then the Cloverleaf team is with Aaron. So if you're going to introduce them, they'll be with us. But at this point, Aaron, I turn it over to you for your presentation, and when you need things clicked, they'll be
clicked. Do the awkward, please click.
Yeah.
All right. My name is Aaron Bilyeu. I'm the Chief Development Officer from Cloverleaf Infrastructure. With me tonight, I have Jeff Lake and Parin Patel. They're both development managers that work with me on my team, each with kind of their own specialty, and they will be continuing to work on the project, assuming we continue to move forward. Sorry.
Yeah, we had it set for Danny DeVito, who's coming later.
If it gets too far away, let me know, and I'll try and lean. So, really, this presentation kind of breaks down into two general sections. One is kind of about Cloverleaf and about our business model and what we really do and look for as a company. And then the second is a more generic kind of look at data centers overall. Just kind of talking about what they are. Thought I had all of the alarms turned off. About what they do, about what kind of the layouts are, what they kind of look like, some of the functions, and then also talk about some of the common questions that we get and some of the misperceptions that are out there about data centers. We're not going to talk about the specifics of the actual proposed project. I think that's something that will continue to come over time. And your commitment for me is to continue to be as transparent as we can be. That's kind of one of our core principles at Cloverleaf. So About us, what we do is we really create sustainable, scalable sites that support the largest electrical load customers out there. We do some work for advanced manufacturing, such as batteries and things like that. But really, our core business, and you'll see this when we get to kind of the about the team, is really data centers. That's really where we shine. We know the most. We've come from that industry, and we have the connections to that industry to be able to make projects like this successful. What we do is we have a very unique approach to siting. This project is a bit different due to the work that had been done for the previous project where the energy opportunity was already present, but typically we use a very different approach than most, basically following the power. So rather than saying, hey, here's a really good data center site and can we get power there, the power has become the real driver, and so we tend to find the power first and then assemble the real estate to go with that. And then really, one of the important things to understand is that data centers really power AI and cloud growth. And literally everything that we do that's going on in the country right now and in the world is largely related to data centers in some format. The Facebook posts, the meeting notifications, the emails, and it really kind of goes from there. That's really just the tip of the iceberg there. So can we click? Who's clicking? I'm clicking. Okay, perfect. Just need to know where to look. And this is also an interesting setup because everybody's looking in different directions because of the screen, so I'm not sure who to kind of focus on here. But so our overall solution, really, number one, is about our expertise and understanding the power grid and really how utilities are structuring loads and tariffs today. Again, we take a very different approach that I'll talk to a little bit later that we believe is the right way to develop these large projects. Again, I mentioned and touched on the site selection, really focusing on the energy first and then going to the real estate. Our business model is we identify the electrical loads, we negotiate the contracts with the utilities, we get the real estate under contract, and we either buy those sites and then sell them to a hyperscaler or a co-location provider, or they just buy all of that from us before we close. So we're capitalized to close and own the sites. Many times, for the sake of speed, we actually will just turn those contracts over to someone, and they will assume those contracts and move the projects going forward. It really isn't a lot different from standard real estate development. This could be industrial development, it could be developing a housing subdivision. Just in this case, we target specifically data centers, again, just because of our knowledge and background and the things we've done. On the development approach, we really do all of the due diligence. Having come from a hyperscaler, I understand what it takes to have someone say, yes, I can buy that site. I've been pitched hundreds of sites and bought 0 of them from people like us because they don't understand what it really takes. So we do all of that work just as a hyperscaler would do the very, very thorough diligence on the sites, on working with the communities and the energy teams to make sure all of that really comes together. Our team, I won't drain this. Largely, there's 2 sets of specialties here. One is people coming out of the renewable energy industry, which very closely ties into data centers in the ways in which renewable energies have to interconnect into the grid to supply power overall. And then the other kind of set of skill sets here is coming from the data center world. So Dave, our CEO, he's come out of the renewable energy industry, as well as Jonathan. They have worked together. Dave has founded a couple companies, sold those companies, and got paired up with our third founder on the right, a gentleman named Brian Janis. Brian, I jokingly call him the godfather of the data center energy industry. He was employee number 1 at Microsoft in the energy space and built that team to, I believe, around 200 people when he left about a year and a half ago, just to take some time off, and got connected with Dave, and they ultimately ended up founding the company along with Jonathan Abibi. Myself, so Brian and I were peers at Microsoft. So Brian ran the global energy team. I ran the global land development team. I left, excuse me, I left Microsoft and ended up in the same position for Meta. So that's Facebook, Instagram, Reels, all of those things. And was running, again, the global real estate development team for Meta. Both Katie and Maddie have come from the renewables world. So Katie is our general counsel and Maddie is our VP of finance. And then the final gentleman on there, Noor Bernhardt, also came from Microsoft. He is intimately familiar with We Energies and how the process works here in Wisconsin. Thank you, sir. He was
Aaron. Guests who are standing in the back, there are seats up here. If you guys could please take those. Thank you.
No problem. Gave me a chance to get a drink and swallow. It was good. And then, so Noor has been spent a lot of time here in Wisconsin. He negotiated the energy agreement for the Microsoft project down in Racine. So he's been working with We Energies and the state regulators and others for a long time. So Noor knows how to get this project done for us. So that's a bit about Cloverleaf overall. Let me give you just a little bit about cloud and data centers and overview and kind of what this really means and what these projects really mean. So what is the cloud? It really is large storage facilities. There's compute, there's storage, which is basically servers, inside of very large buildings with very complex mechanical and electrical systems to keep them cool, keep them powered, and then a lot of fiber optic cable to interconnect them. As I like to say, and certain people like to make fun of me for, it's quiet, dark rooms and servers going blinky, blinky all day. There's an office component, and people work in the office and monitor what's going on, and the only time people go into those server halls is when you get a hard drive failure or something like that that needs to be done. So there's a lot of data center technicians who will work in the facilities, going in and out and doing those kinds of jobs. But by and large, it's just very large buildings full of servers. Talked a little bit about the resilience. Once data centers get up and running, you don't want them to go down. There's some examples on the next page about things that actually run through data centers. When data centers go offline, it can get very dangerous. Things like air traffic control, the national grid, healthcare systems, financial institutions, banking, all of those things run through the data centers. And so making sure that they're very, very resilient is incredibly important. They are also very secure facilities. So there is security guards and there is fences around them. They're called K-rated fences, basically designed to keep cars from driving through, right? We had an unfortunate incident in New Orleans, an attack on people with vehicles, but historically people have tried to do that to data centers. So now data centers all use K-rated fence to prevent those sorts of attacks. We clicked forward, which is okay, because I think we were going to get redundant. You want another one? No. And again, why do we need more data centers? So on the right's just kind of a quick representation. That's not one that we need to get too deeply into, but this just talks about the proliferation and spread of high-speed internet and where you could access that 10 or 11 years ago. And now where you can access that today. So again, the dark blue is just representing how much more broadband there is and how much more access we have to data and how important the data centers are. So if you just look kind of down the side there, some of the services that we all use every day, web hosting, video conferencing, emailing, data storage, online banking, gaming. So all of the things that we're talking about that are really in addition to the critical services I mentioned, just the services that we all use every day through our phones. So the components of a data center, if you look at the kind of the layout, they're really pretty simple. So you'll have multiple of the data halls, and you'll see in this representation there's 4 of them. The way the mechanical systems tend to work is they designed the facilities to put the mechanical systems on the inside to reduce the overall amount of noise coming out. So you don't want, there's an aesthetic function to it and a noise component. So we try and tuck the mechanical systems. It's like nobody puts their air conditioner in front of the house, right? Put it off to the side or in an area where you're not too often. So very similar concept there. We will then have, if you start on the right, I wish I actually had a pointer, there will be a guardhouse where all of the traffic comes in and out. Some data centers you'll see, this one is representing a separate office building and employee parking. Other data centers will actually have smaller offices with each data hall. Some companies do it one way, some companies do it the other. You will have just asphalt roads going around to be able to service the equipment, be able to move things around the site. And then coming in, kind of typically on the far side, is a substation. So the electricity will come in from the utility at a higher voltage. You have a substation that then takes that higher voltage, usually, and in this case would be 345 kilovolts, and then you would step that down to 138 kilovolts, which is more usable for the data center. So there will be a complex of substations on site, and then just some storm drainage. But this basic concept is not too different from what we would envision could potentially happen at this site. Well, could be bigger, could be smaller, could be more buildings, could be less buildings. Really depends on who the end user that ends up occupying the site is. Okay. Long-term economic benefits coming from data centers. The fact that data centers come in, I talked a bit about the reliability and the importance of making sure that the data centers don't go offline. That actually has a significant benefit to the community as well. Because when We Energies is making the upgrades to support the specific lines for the data center, that also has a second order effect of reinforcing the overall electrical grid. So what you'll find is you have less outages in areas with data centers because of the critical nature of the data centers. Also, as we look at needing to bring utilities to the site, because there will be needs for domestic water and sewer, certainly, that again, there is advanced infrastructure that becomes available to others through the expansion of the overall infrastructure. There is a series of tax payments that will get negotiated through a development agreement with the city. That will all be done. There's corporate income taxes, so there's a lot of economic benefits specifically coming out of the task or coming out of the data center development. On the workforce development, there is again, depending on how large, could be 1,200 to 1,500 construction workers on site on average. My former employer, Meta, on a very large site, just committed to 5,000 workers, which I don't know how you're going to get 5,000 workers on a site at a time. It's going to be a really interesting site to get that done. And then you will have the traffic from the construction, obviously. But then once the data centers are completed, typically there's 50 to 100 very high-paying jobs that get created for each data center. Some of those jobs do not require bachelor's degrees. Many require only associate's degrees. There's job training programs that a lot of the companies will put in place. So it's possible that people without any college education could have a high-paying job in a data center by getting into the job training programs. So it really is a benefit and allows a lot of people opportunities to good paying jobs. And then finally, on the energy rates, this is something that we're super clear about. I'll hit it here and then I'll come back to it again. Through the way we will structure the tariff, which is effectively the rate with the energy company, there will be no impact on the rates to the existing customer base. The additional energy assets, so the additional projects that We Energies will bring on to bring power to this site. Those are new projects, wind projects, solar projects, and the off-taker and owner of this site will make the commitments to pay for those and to bring them onto the grid. And so the rate for the electricity coming to this site will be based on how much it costs We Energies to bring those additional assets. So again, that has the benefit of not impacting the residential and existing business rates because it's a totally separate tariff structure. What do data centers look like? I picked 4. There's hundreds of data centers out there. There's thousands of data centers out there through the magic of Google. So Meta in my hometown, now my hometown, I'm really from Omaha, is a single story in Mesa. Their designs look all the same. You can see them all over the country. Google has a data center in Maize, Oklahoma that has a big mural on the side of it. So they can be aesthetically pleasing. QTS is one of the larger co-location providers out there. This one is a 2-story data center in Ashburn, Virginia, and then just an Amazon data center in New Albany, Ohio. All of those markets, with the exception of Mayes County, Mesa, Ashburn, and New Albany are very data center dense environments. Mayes County, Oklahoma is not. But I just like the picture, so I thought I'd put that one in. Okay, and again, some of these I've hit, but I'll just go through them again quickly. I do a lot of these meetings and I get these questions over and over. We get a lot of concerned people, rightly concerned people, because they hear things to the contrary of this. And some of these things have been problems in the past. So the first one is will the data center take all of the power and cause electrical outages? So the answer in both cases is no. Bringing data centers into the area enhances the local grid, which reduces the overall number of outages that you have. Will the data center take all the power? Again, the answer there is no. The way We Energies is required to do their energy study, they have to make sure that they have enough energy to supply their entire service area on the worst day plus a safety factor, okay? So there's plenty of energy. The rumors that data centers are taking all of the energy are not true. There will be new generation assets brought online that will cover the energy that comes to this data center. Now, those are not on site, right? It'll be wind farms and solar farms, nuclear relicensing, all sorts of different generation assets that will be coming online. But that will add into the overall ability of We Energies to serve so that there is no running out of electricity, okay? Will electrical rates go up for existing customers? Again, no. As I explained, the cost of those new generation assets as well as the transmission to get the power to the site, that will be borne directly by the data center company that ultimately takes this, and they will build that into their rate structure. They will pay We Energies back for that infrastructure over time. Will there be a lot of new traffic in the area? Again, the answer is no. There will be traffic during the construction period. But after that, it gets to be a very, very quiet neighbor. Very few semi-trucks going in and out. If there's a major piece of equipment that goes out, you might see a flatbed bringing something in, but that is incredibly, incredibly rare. The only thing that comes into data centers once they're built that comes on large trucks is when they do server refreshes. So the servers come in large racks. Those racks get replaced every 3 to 5 years just as new hardware and new technology comes out. But by and large, there's no semi-truck traffic to existing data centers. How much noise will the data centers generate? This is one that I've spent a lot of time dealing with. Newer technologies have actually driven down the noise factors. The way the buildings get sited drive down the noise factors. One of the best things you can do to reduce noise is create distance. If you start looking at decibels and how you reduce decibels and doubling the distance is a reduction of 4 decibels. These given the potential site here, we're not going to be jamming these data centers onto the site, so there will be space for that. And then the other thing that we really like about this site, which is going to sound counterintuitive, is it's next to the interstate. So there's already a significant noise generating source in the area, and the data centers typically generate less noise than the interstate does. And so it's not like you're going to hear a whole lot of extra noise because, again, it's already a noise source. It gets to be a bigger problem when you're out in the middle of the country and it's a very, very quiet area. Start putting data centers in there, that's where you'll start to get noise complaints. The other major source of noise complaints in the industry really is Northern Virginia. Northern Virginia has, I believe the number's over 1,000 data centers now, and they're literally building them next to brand new subdivisions. And so 100 feet away, you've got a 2 or 3 story data center. That's where you're seeing a lot of the noise complaints with data centers. This site will not be that, given the adjacent neighbors and just the size of the site. And then the last one really has to do with water consumption. This is another one I've spent an inordinate amount of time answering. I was responsible for the water team at both Microsoft and Meta. I have put development agreements in place for lots of water over the years. You can go and research those. You can find articles about all of the water that data centers consume. The fact of the matter is technologies have changed and the data center industry has changed. For instance, Microsoft has committed to have no water consumption going forward for any of their AI data centers. So the industry has reacted to the negative press as well as kind of doing the right thing from a sustainability perspective. And the technologies have changed so that water is almost not used anymore in data centers. There likely will be some water, very small amount, relative to using water for cooling. But in the winter, in climates like this, when it gets very dry, there needs to be some humidification. You know, you walk around your house this time of year and you start getting static shocks. Same thing can happen in the data center. So there likely would be some water consumption for the static portion of this. And then obviously just for bathrooms and break rooms and things like that on the campus would require domestic water from the city as well as sewers. But that's really about all that water gets used in most data center designs now. So I think that with that was kind of the end of the presentation. So I'd be open to questions.
Council members, any specific questions for Aaron? At this point, Mr. Plater?
I think I kind of asked this question maybe already. It's in my head, but Aaron, can you talk about the water usage then in general, like lake water? How much lake water would be used for this project?
So we are evaluating the opportunity to utilize lake water for cooling. We've done a study. Our consultant has met with the Department of Natural Resources, who believes it's a very feasible and viable solution. The way that would likely work is again, a zero water consumption system. It's really not too much different than what all of the power plants on all of the Great Lakes do, where they pull in water, keep the water inside of a closed system, and use a heat plate technology. So you're pushing the heat from inside into the water, warming the water, and then pushing the water back into the lake. So there's essentially zero water consumption, and it's just a slight heating of the water going into the lake. We had them look at various volumes, and ultimately what it came down to is it's a BTU problem. So how many BTUs can you put back into the water without impacting the environment at different times of the year? And so as we are talking to potential off-takers and customers who would buy this site, that will be an opportunity that we will talk to them, and they will need to design a mechanical system to utilize that if they want to.
Sure.
Otherwise, they could just do air-cooled chillers or dry coolers, which is kind of the two current technologies that people are using. And there's no water at all, and it's just utilizing electricity to cool the servers.
Thanks.
Just for clarification for our audience, BTUs is the heat right?
Yes, so BTU is a British thermal unit, and if you want to get nerdy, it's the amount of energy required to raise 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. And so they talk about, that's how they talk about heat, and heat rejection is in BTUs. So if you've heard of tons of air conditioning, a ton of air conditioning is 12,000 BTUs. So it's all kind of in that same family of units and mechanical engineering.
Yeah, thank you. The teacher in me always wants clarification because,
Well, don't ask too much more. I'm just an architect.
Yeah.
That's about all the mechanical engineering.
well,
know.
I thought I heard Bachman-Turner overdrive, but that's not what you said. Jonathan?
Thanks. You had a diagram of a data center campus earlier in your presentation, Aaron. Tell us what a sound wall is, what that does for noise reduction. Will there be sound walls between each of the buildings? Like, kind of describe that for me, would you?
Yeah. We've all driven down the interstate, and there's a house, and there's a sound wall to try to reduce the sound between the home and the interstate. Same concept. And so when we get to the final design and what's going on out there, there will be sound studies done, and that'll be part of the process of working with the city to determine what an acceptable noise level is coming from the data center. And sound walls are one of the techniques that get used in areas where too much sound is being generated. They will put in sound walls to reduce the amount of sound being emitted from the data center. So we may or may not need them, depending on size, location, mechanical system. All of those factors go into the ultimate design.
So just for the community and council's recognition, every time we're asking a question or other questions that we have, we are going to compile an FAQ that we're going to publish out. So like Aaron's answers just now to Councilman Pleitner's question, those will be caught, captured, and then factual so that we're not leading with, rumors throughout the community, that it's just very clear this is what those are. So thank you. And if you have more, feel free to ask them. I just want to make sure
thanks.
people got that.
As long as I got you, Aaron.
Yeah, happy
So
to.
obviously you mentioned some big name companies here in the presentation. Like, what are the terms of these leases that these firms will sign? And is it 5 years? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it like, how long will a company be in a data center?
I'm not aware of anyone decommissioning many data centers. We also don't lease to them. So our business model is really primarily to sell the land to one of those or other companies, and they build their own data centers. It just keeps it simpler that way.
Sure.
Alderman Terry.
Yeah, this is kind of based on the concept of when you described your company and then some of the photos you showed. You showed like examples of 4 different data centers, but can you tell me how, like, typically what those data centers were taking up in acres? Each one individually?
I can't, but I could go research that for you.
Okay, so my understanding would be, and I realize you haven't gotten to this point yet, but would you anticipate that this would be largely taken up by one big company, or are you anticipating that it would be more likely done half a dozen different companies with smaller ones?
It's too early to say for sure. Given the other factor that will drive that is what we find out from We Energies about how much energy they can deliver and when, because that will drive the ultimate build out. If I had to guess, I would think we would have probably one company ultimately on that campus. It's not. I know I talked about real estate development, but it's not like we're going to put in roads and sewers and plat 6 different lots and market those 6 different lots. It's more likely that someone would come in and take the entire campus and then build out their data centers to match the energy ramp from We. Because we won't come in and say, here's all the power you can have, and you have it on day one. They will say, either quarter by quarter or every 6-month increments, here's when we can deliver energy. And then the data center companies, what they do is they start their construction so that construction is done to intercept the power delivery so that you're making maximum utilization and efficiency from that. So given how we think that's going to happen, I would anticipate that one company would come in and do that and just continue to build for their own use.
If one company, this is my last question there, if if one company would come in and do that, you mentioned that, the jobs are kind of dependent, so many jobs per building. How many buildings would you anticipate that being?
That's going to be, again, largely dependent on the amount of energy that we can ultimately deliver. The other thing that's happening, and again, everybody in the data center industry wants to be as transparent as possible and give you really good answers. The reality is, when I was at Microsoft, our standard building block was 48 megawatts for a building, right? At Meta, it was 150 for a campus, right? So they're getting bigger in terms of megawatts. So just a kind of an educational point when talking about data centers, when you say how big, no one will say 300,000 square feet. They'll say 50 megawatts or 80 megawatts because that's kind of the unit that everyone speaks about. There are larger and larger data centers getting built with artificial intelligence coming in. So the cloud is evolving more towards artificial intelligence, and there's now buildings being built, single buildings at 350 megawatts in a single building, right? So that one is 7 times the size of what we would build at Microsoft and 3 times the size of what we were doing at Meta. So those buildings would end up having larger and larger workforces to support that amount of square footage. So again, I wish I could give you a more definitive answer, but trying to be as transparent as I can about the scaling and sizing and how the jobs work.
Thank you. Alderman Sigwart?
Is it your experience that the company would actually sign a contract for fire protection?
Yes. Fire protection is one of the really significant issues in data centers. And so we would work with the local and state fire marshal to make sure that we're meeting those requirements. And in many cases, the requirements from the data center companies are more stringent than the state or the local codes. So there is a really, really high focus because when these things catch on fire, bad things happen. It almost never happens. It's very rare. The last one I remember was in Japan about 4 years ago. But there is a very, very high focus on safety and particularly fire protection.
Thank you.
Other questions? Alderperson Postal? I don't know what's going on.
Can you tell me if you do any preliminary outreach so that if and when this moves forward, you have sufficient skilled labor to perform the construction?
Absolutely. That is one of the things that the pre-construction group with the hyperscaler or the colo provider, they will make sure that they are doing the outreach well in advance to make sure that they'll be able to get the skilled trades in place. Keep in mind the biggest percentage when you're looking at a number like a 1,200 has to do with electricians. And for the first 6 months or so, there's very few electricians on site, right? You're moving dirt, you're digging trenches, you're putting in concrete, you're putting in steel. And so it's almost like a bell curve that's kind of shifted 2/3 to the right with the ramp up. And then it's really the last 6 or 8 months where you get there. So a project like this, you would have some time to make sure that you could get the appropriate workforce.
Aaron, I'll follow up. You talked, Alderman Sigward's question about fire protection. Can you, I guess, elaborate a little bit more on that? Because fire protection in a data center is built into the data center.
Yep.
It's not necessarily something that a community is going to have to go buy a whole lot of specialized equipment. It's built in and provided by the data center owner.
You are correct. There is the systems are actually built and integrated into the overall data center. There is what they call a FOC, a facility operations center, where they can see all of the systems, everything that's working and not working, anything goes offline. There's standard operating procedures about how to deal with all of that. In most cases, the local fire marshal will still want the ability to go fight a fire in traditional ways. So quite honestly, on a campus like this, where we would probably end up building a small water tower or a water tower for fire protection on the site. And it's not so much about the flow, it's usually about the pressure.
Right.
And so having a water tower on site to ensure appropriate pressure to satisfy the fire marshal is something I would anticipate would happen here.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I had 30-plus years running data centers in all parts of the world, but
Yep.
water in a data center is also not a good thing. So it's
Not-
it's a last resort thing.
It absolutely is. Does a lot of damage if you have to get there.
You mentioned jobs in there, and I guess just to elaborate, my experience has been you've got a crew that's hands-on in the data center replacing, like you said, failed servers or servers. You probably have an asset management function, keeping track of who has what and its lifespan and things
Yep.
like that. And then the monitoring. And then I think the biggest thing that we ran into was patching and doing updates. And
Yep.
that's really the skill sets that are needed in running and operating a data center type.
Absolutely. The data center technicians are probably the bulk of the staff. And those are the ones that can easily be trained through job training programs and whatnot to be in there. And those operations tend to run not 24/7. So the people sitting and monitoring the FOC and make sure everything's going, that's kind of a 3-shift, 24-hour a day. And then the rest of those, if something fails, typically it can wait till the morning. And so those tend to be more 9 to 5 kind of jobs.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yep.
Aaron, just real quick, could you explain what a hyperscaler is?
So by my definition, there's 4 hyperscalers. So the 4 hyperscalers are Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, and Google. There are a couple other companies that are starting to build larger data centers. That would be people like Oracle and Salesforce. And then I assume the next question is, what is a colocation provider? A colo provider or a colocation provider is a company that builds large data centers and then rents them back to the hyperscalers. So the hyperscalers think about it like they're building their own office building. A colo provider is like a landlord building an office building that someone would rent from them.
Thank you. Just, again, teacher Ted thinks a hyperscaler is a kid at recess running up the side of the building. Mr.
Doing it
Gasper?
really fast,
Yeah.
hyperspeed.
You had said there wouldn't be power production on site. So would there be solar panels on the roofs at all, or is that something that to be determined, or just is not economical here?
To be determined. The reality is some municipalities require things like that, like solar panels on site. But compared to the overall load of a data center, that doesn't really go very far, quite honestly. It's something that someone may choose to do or the city may require. But typically, all of those renewable assets are built in larger installations off-site. Then all the electricity goes into the grid, and then we all withdraw the amount of electricity that we need.
Okay. Another question: as you consolidate the site and eventually purchase the land, what are your plans for the property owners who choose not to sell out or not to sell? Access, I presume, has to be maintained.
Absolutely. Yep. We will work with the city to make sure that we're doing the right things for the people who don't want to sell. We have many landowners that are willing to sell that we have under contract. We have a few that we're still having conversations with.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question.
Quick question. You talked about noise pollution, but I'm curious with light pollution, being that a rural area and sensitivity to our neighbors to the west and the north that are not in the metro area are scaling down the lighting. Here would be a good example is CSMO and Mequon.
Okay.
Mequon required them to lower the lighting on their parking lots so
Yep.
you don't have that glow.
Yes. We would work with the city as part of our development agreement and as part of the zoning to make sure that we're having those light levels at appropriate levels. Data centers have, they kind of do the same things that car lots used to. If you remember car lots 20 years ago, they would just blast the light and it would be offensive, and now they all have the lighting where it comes straight down. And there's the zero property line laws where you can't cast any light off of your property. So data centers are really much the same way. They don't tend to light up all of their mechanical yards because there's no one out there doing anything, and it just costs more electricity. So the lighting levels have really, really come down in data centers. And again, we would work with the city to make sure that we're setting those levels, just like the noise levels, at points that are going to work for everyone.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that point, which, Aaron, you also softballed here for, is that the zoning for this has not been written. You didn't exist 25 years ago, so there was no reason to have zoning for it. So that zoning, those parameters will be designed and developed, brought forward for what the needs are, landscaping, lighting, all those components. And I think we're going to be pretty aggressive as a community to make sure that it's if it occurs, that it is a benefit to us in
Yeah,
all of those aspects. So,
And as a follow-up there, Ted, I mean, you're not the only ones.
right.
So data centers as an asset class didn't really exist 5 or 10 years ago. In doing this in 40-ish countries, I think I've run into 2 or 3 jurisdictions that actually had data centers written into their zoning code. So having this conversation and making sure that we can develop guidelines that work for the community, work for the city, and also work for the data center is something that we're very used to doing.
Yeah. And I'm gonna ask you one more quick question so that we give the attorney an opportunity here to speak before we get to 6:30. Are the majority of your customers, are they primarily domestic? Are they,
Yes.
okay.
We won't bring anybody from China here. All of the customers that I know that we're talking to, and I'm talking to all of them, they're all US-based companies.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, then I'm going to introduce Chris. Chris Smith is from Von Briesen and Roper, and he's going to help guide us through the process, timelines, et cetera. And if we could just tell our guests in the hallway, if somebody could reach out there, we're probably going to run a little bit over. We're not going to rush through this. So the firefighters and police officers who are here, that'd be great. Thank you, Aaron. We really appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Chris Smith. I am special counsel to the city to assist with this project and this process. My role in this project is to ensure that the city and its taxpayers are protected in the short term as this opportunity is explored, and protected in the long term if this project moves forward. As the mayor said, I think at the beginning of this session, we're at step 1 of 1,000. Perhaps that's true. I do agree that there are many steps in the process. Along the way, there will be multiple opportunities for the city council and the public to learn more and get all your questions answered. The first steps are to ensure that city taxpayers are not negatively financially impacted by any outside costs related to simply the exploration of this project. This is why the Common Council tonight will be considering an agreement that Aaron's company has already agreed to ensure that any outside costs related to the exploration and discussion about this potential development will be reimbursed by Cloverleaf. Protecting taxpayers from any negative impact will be a common theme throughout this process. And there are many legal tools to ensure that that occurs, including contractual contingencies that allow the city and the town to unwind any work that we have done if certain contingencies do not occur. Also, we have the ability to create a tax incremental financing district to ensure that the only city taxpayer that would bear any costs for this project is the company itself and not the general taxpayers. Finally, because this project is likely to take place in land that is currently within the town of Port Washington, we are in discussions with town representatives to reach a mutually beneficial annexation agreement for any necessary land. The project site is still not completely determined, but that will be one of the steps in this process. So that is all I have as far as my remarks and as far as the timeline. There's much more to come. Thank you.
Any questions for council? Thank you. Explained that very well. Okay, any general questions for us to collect for FAQs? Otherwise, again, for the community members here tonight, what the questions asked by council will be collected, put together with the answers. We will be asking council members to submit other questions for studies, and for instance, impact on city infrastructure, impact on city staffing, impact on community, environmental impacts, a lot of things that they have to do, but at least we can get those out of the way. We want to be as proactive as possible so that we are in a position to make, as informed decisions as we can. Alderwoman Postle?
Can you tell me, is there a central location for all of the residents to send their questions?
Yes. Ms. Pingle, you want to give the email address out?
Yes, and I will
Is
post,
it economicdevelopment@portwashington.gov?
yes, but I think it's just
We'll put it on the city's Facebook page tomorrow morning
with this presentation.
with the full presentation. Any other questions from council? Okay, otherwise, I just want to end this with a couple of brief statements so that people can recognize, tonight. One, I really appreciate Cloverleaf coming tonight. They flew into Wisconsin to be able to present to us as a community, true understanding of who they are and what they do. I think one of the things that attracted us to them is that what their company does is different. And what they do is they do the proactive work with the community and the region so that we can ensure that we're making good decisions, and they'll work as a partner, but recognizing that we're also going to put in some firm expectations, as you heard Chris say tonight, that this would not cost the city of Port Washington a dime. And we appreciated that opportunity. As developers come and in our preliminary conversations, we will not explore things on the cost of the taxpayers to the benefit of the developer. It is their responsibility. So we appreciate them doing that. The pros and cons, you've heard both. You've heard a lot of pros tonight. You've laid out the cons. I've done the same, and personally, I want you to know that I believe the pros far outweigh the cons for the city of Port Washington. I think back to what it would have been like to sit in here when Mr. Niederkorn came to Port Washington and said, "I want to build Simplicity," or Mr. Bolins came and "I want to build Bolins," or when Gilson family came and opened a foundry, or any of those founding community partners that were in Port Washington that are now gone. And as you saw, our tax base being 2% against manufacturing. When I was in middle school, that was not the case in the city of Port Washington, and the tax burden just continues to increase on residents. And I'm hypersensitive to that, as I believe my council friends are as well. The other thing I want you to think about too is the secondary and tertiary opportunities that are presented when something like this comes along. Port Washington's infrastructure, the manufacturing we do have left, was established as a result of supply chain manufacturing to feed those different manufacturing companies in Port Washington. I mean, we are one of the world's largest producers of cotter pins, and we used to make them exclusively for, Bolins and Simplicity, and now we make them for John Deere and Caterpillar and all the different things that go on out at KMC. So I'd ask you to vision forward to what are the possibilities and what does it do for our future and for the kids? And there are debates to be had, and they will be had, and discussions to be reviewed, and it shouldn't be too smooth, and because that's democracy and that's the beauty of it. But at the end of the day, the impact to our school system, when we bring in a technology-based company and the investment that will be made into bringing labor in there from the local area, the ability to attract and retain our young people in our city, because there are jobs that are exciting. And you start to look at things that happened in places like Madison when Epic started just as a small little software company, and how that's completely transformed that whole region to the benefit of everyone who lives there. So there's so many different things that will happen. I've done the cons list. I'm more than happy to talk to you about that. I share the same concerns about the impact and the sustainability of it environmentally, but I think that's what's really important for us is at the end of the day, the city of Port Washington, the benefits for a development like this for our community and region are tending to outweigh the negatives on it. So I appreciate that you all came out tonight. I invite you to stay for the secondary meeting. If you plan on not staying, I'd ask that you give room to the firefighters and police officers' families as well, so that they can enjoy and see their sons get sworn in for their fantastic new jobs in leadership. Otherwise, again, we'll post on our Facebook page tomorrow and out to the city the email account that will be collecting all of the questions. Again, that's for questions and inquiries, and then we'll keep going with that. Okay? Council, anything further? Just 5 minutes. Yep, we're going to take a 5-minute recess to reset the room and get going. But are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn this work session.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any questions or concerns on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?